After knocking the Silent Hill 2 remake out of the park, Blooper team has developed quite a reputation for themselves to uphold in the survival horror genre. Truth be told, I was a little skeptical when looking at the trailers for this game, where the monsters shown reminded me of the Callisto Protocol, where that horror title had left me feeling disappointed and frustrated with the current state of horror games, where they relied too heavily on jump scares that came across as comical rather than the intended purpose, and the poorly implemented combat system that felt like a chore to slog through, especially when facing bosses that one-shot you or multiple enemies that treat combat like a riot, creating some genuine rage-filled moments with a camera that kept you locked on one enemy at a time. However, to my surprise, Blooper team had taken that past disappointment and replaced it with a satisfying and fun experience that left me coming back for more every time. Cronos The New Dawn is a breath of fresh air into survival horror with the oppressive experience not just in combat but exploration of the desolate world we find ourselves in. Being set in Poland 2035, Cronos strands the player in a ruined and dark wasteland after an event known as the Change had occurred in the 1980s that twisted humanity into grotesque and warped husks known as orphans. The game is littered with echoes of the past through its environmental storytelling with the architecture branding signs, along with the many notes and audio recordings you will find on your journey that function as a breadcrumb trail that builds with the overall narrative that only left me eager to know more on what had happened, which can be found through the tears we find in the fabric of reality that can be manipulated, allowing us to continue our investigation into the past in the hopes the answers we seek will be found somewhere in the 1980s, giving us two sides of the same coin, which only adds to the tension and atmosphere we feel as we travel through these locations, from traversing through buildings that look to be on the brink of collapse to the many nests we come across that resemble the corruption from Dead Space, where even these environments are antagonistic towards the player, with the walls of these corrupted habitats housing more enemies for you to contend with, and these environments give us a familiar sense of hopelessness that tells us that no help is coming because there is no one else to turn to in these desperate and desolate times. The differences between 2035 and 1980s Poland is a steep contrast, but a welcome one, which gives more meaning to both versions of the environment, letting us see how these locations had once been before being destroyed, giving the world more character and depth. The character we play as mirrors these desolate times with her own cold and distant personality, where she often makes note of past events, such as when confronting Edwards, where he begs her to let him go after his friend, but the traveler tells him that her life has no consequence, since the virus will kill her anyway.
It wouldn't change anything. She does not matter.
However, players will find how this cold personality will open up over the course of the game, as the essences she collects begin to weigh down on her mind, to the point she begins to question herself, giving a level of humanity back to the character despite of the closed-off exterior. As many developers would say, headphones are mandatory, and this game is no exception. Like games such as Dead Space, Cronos absolutely nails the sound design, where through the use of ambience it makes the world feel alive and grounded, where even in silence you feel the harsh wind of isolation nipping at you, along with the sounds the enemies make, where the one that made me feel most uncomfortable had been the pulsating sax, making it sound like it was stretching and contorting in real time. And the soundtrack is great at setting you up for full panic mode when you find more enemies than you initially realized. With the sounds and music in combination with each other, these can create some unsettling moments. Despite of borrowed concepts, the game does have some unique ideas that it brings to the table within the combat system that punishes the player for each enemy slain, with the use of its merge system, where every orphan you take down can be absorbed by nearby enemies in real time, adding to the difficulty of the onslaught you face, which gives the orphan more armor, health, and abilities, and it doesn't just stop at one absorption, but the enemies can absorb many corpses to fuel its aggression towards you. However, like in games such such as The Evil Within or Dead Space, there is a way to deal with this threat. Through the use of torch fuels, you can burn those mangled corpses into a pile of ash, leaving the tentacled monstrosity with nothing to feed on. However, due to limited uses of these resources, this in turn forces you to think strategically of how and when you use such a tool to your advantage. In my time of fighting the orphans, I found myself rethinking my strategy from time to time. With some moments I made sure to kill the monsters closer to the corpses, so that when I use my torch fuel, it doesn't just affect one corpse but most of them, so the bigger encounter will be easier to tackle. One tip that I can give to you is something I found when using fuel barrels in combat, which is setting an enemy ablaze before landing that final blow, which actually burns the corpse if done fast enough, saving you from using that torch fuel. However, these fuel canisters can be found in dispensers, giving you unlimited uses, just so long as you don't mind constantly revisiting past locations to make a fight easier. One thing I have heard from other reviewers is that the game forces you to be perfect with your aiming, since you have scarce resources and ammo. However, I found that by exploring the environment, the game would reward me with resources that would allow me to deck myself out with what I need before the next fight. With each death, I found myself thinking of that fight I lost as a puzzle rather than a simple combat mechanic, asking myself of what I could change to come out as the victor next time rather than returning to the distorted game over screen. In some instances, the game presented a difficult choice to me, since the game doesn't allow you to drop items, and if you want to free up space in your inventory, you either have to destroy the item or use it first.
We'll be closing in 2 minutes.
In one instance, I had to destroy a health item so I could get more ammunition, which is a welcome addition to the difficulty of the game. I never thought that the game was unfair or that the enemies were too large in number, but that I needed to remain open-minded and change my approach to these situations. In other words, the combat system requires you to plan out your moves and improvise your strategy when things don't go to plan. However, resources can be found in areas you face the orphans or bosses in, giving you more opportunities to craft what you need when in the heat of battle. In some cases, however, you will find that there are outs to combat areas, meaning you can avoid certain fights rather than having to blast your way through every single enemy encounter in the game. Another great addition to the game is through the use of its save rooms that allow you to store items and gain upgrades, whether this is by using the cores you find scattered around the world or the energy you pick up. In either case, the upgrades you gain are balanced to the oppressiveness of the world, as you won't be feeling like a killing machine anytime soon, since each upgrade cost is followed by a more expensive one, meaning it's another cog in the machine of strategy. Don't want to find yourself feeling short on fuel torches? Well, you can upgrade that so you have an extra one in the chamber. Want more inventory spaces? Well, you can upgrade the size of your pockets, and it's the same for resources. These tweaks may not play into a power fantasy, but it will certainly help you in a tight spot, making the time spent in New Dawn more tolerable rather than too easy. Where the upgrades can be expensive, there are items you can find to ease that expense by trading them in for stacks of energy, which is another instance of choice making, as I found myself revisiting previously explored areas to pick those items up once I had freed up space in my inventory. Though the game brings a lot of good, there are things that require more work, such as when traversing the locations the world has to offer, sometimes you will notice holes in the fabric of reality, and no, not intentional ones. However, these are minor things, and in my time of playing the game, I haven't encountered any large occurrences of these texture glitches. However, there are some glitches and bugs that can make a great experience an inconvenience for the player. For example, there is a chance that the game could become unresponsive after meeting the warden, which will result in you having to reload a save. Best case would be to skip that cutscene for peace of mind. In other moments, the game can stutter and lag from time to time, but this is again mostly just an inconvenience to the player rather than an unplayable mess, and developers have it known that they are working on these issues and will send out a patch as soon as possible to correct these things. Despite of these issues, however, if you love all things survival horror, you will thoroughly enjoy Cronos' take on the genre. If Dead Space is a collage of older horror films, then Cronos The New Dawn is a collage of older horror games, where in both cases the past aspects are adapted to create something new and exciting for fans of the genre, making it a breath of fresh air in survival horror, and it will only drag you back wanting more. The last thing I think we should touch on is the scare factor. However, in my personal experience, this game didn't really scare me. There were some moments that caught me off guard, I'm not gonna lie, but nothing that really made me recoil in fear. But rather the game leans into action rather than trying to scare you, but perhaps I'm just desensitized to that experience. In any case, anyone looking for more survival horror that tests you every step of the way should definitely pick this game up. Thanks for watching my review and thoughts on Cronos The New Dawn. Let me know if you agreed with my position on the game and what you thought of this new addition to the roster of Blooper team. And I would also like to give a special thanks to Blooper team for giving me the game early so I could play through it, and I'm certainly going to have a blast going through the story and lore in a later video. Be sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss an upload or the chance to watch me live stream more great games like this one. But as always, be sure to leave this video having a good one.